Thank you.
Howard, is that background upstate New York? Possibly. It looks like what's that art installation called? I'm blanking out.
Yeah, it's Saratoga National Park or whatever.
Okay,
Just,
nice.
yeah.
So we're going to see horses galloping across the back any minute now.
No, I don't think they're allowed on national parks, are they? Maybe the ghost of a horse from revolutionary times.
The ghost of horses past.
Yeah.
Mm.
How are you, Chuck?
I'm good. You know, summer's here, so I'm actually like scrambling to figure out what we're gonna do with our kid. I'm sure you're in a similar boat. Like, summer camps are all canceled. School's gonna be over this week. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have a 13-year-old, so we're trying to recruit her to open up a a family summer camp for the younger ones. So put her in charge. See what happens.
How old are your other ones? So do you have 3 kids total?
Yeah. There's an 11 and an 8-year-old, so.
Okay.
They tend to listen to their older sisters, so.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you think? Should we get started? Or give it another?
I'm open to whenever. How are we doing on attendees? Oh, okay. Maybe another minute.
Yeah.
How are you? I mean, you guys are doing a great job. Keep trying to keep up the momentum with this, like, now extended census campaign, right? It was all supposed to be over at the end of July, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess we did kind of. I guess it's non-response follow-up was supposed to start in May initially.
Right.
A lot of our core outreach was supposed to be long over by now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But I've actually been arguing that non-response follow-up is probably even more important for us to support, because that's where our most vulnerable community members are going to be counted, right? They're the ones that aren't self-responding for whatever reason, So the only way to get them counted, this is like, because they're going to be about 40% of the New York City's population. So it's not an insignificant portion of the population. I know there are concerns that being out in the field at the same time, but I think there's ways to support it without it, being in the way of the Bureau's staffers.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly when everybody's freaked out about opening their doors to strangers right now because of both, well, in particular because of the pandemic, but also because of just, all the stuff that's happening immigration-wise as well.
A fear-mongering administration that's xenophobic, that.
Yeah. So, we have time, but we still have a pretty big challenge ahead of us.
But yeah, to your point, Chuck, like, I think people are exhausted. People are tired of talking about it. I think energy is definitely flagging, and, and funding is running out. So it's just getting harder and harder, I think, in every way.
Yeah, the city funding is, I mean, we I think some are extended, but there's no more money. It's just extended time to use the same money.
Yep.
And then the state funding is just, it's like disappeared, right? I mean, I don't know, but we haven't seen, or the Queen's the Queensborough President's office, they don't know where it is. No one knows where it is.
No, they don't know where it is. Yeah. We can chat when we're not being recorded. I can give you a bit more on that.
Sounds
I
good.
actually spoke a bit with the governor's office this morning. Great. Okay. So small crew, but we'll make sure to get this up on the website. And we'll all learn from each other anyway. So And I want to know what Howard has to say on this part, quite frankly. So I'm going to just view this as a webinar for me that Howard's putting on. So Howard, everyone here knows you. So I don't know if I need to go through the whole, like, Howard is our amazing data guru guy who knows everything about census data and how to look at it. But I just said it anyway. So take it away.
Okay. I think there was other parts of the agenda, right? So, but I'll just start with.
Sorry, yeah. After Howard goes through, what Howard's going to do is take us through different maps that are available and show the use of the different maps. So like different maps can give us different information. And then Hillary is going to walk us through, like, once you've gone through the maps and gotten the information, what do we do with that information, and thinking of it when we start thinking of a path forward to overcome all of the issues that we just talked about at the top: funding, energy flagging, NERFU around the corner, scared of door knocking. So yeah, so Howard, we start with you and looking at maps.
Great. Do I have ability to, can I share my screen?
I think we can make you a co-host, and then you can share your screen.
Okay. All right. Great. So yeah, so thank you, Mita, and thank you, Hillary, as well, for joining me on this webinar. I didn't want to make it sound like I was the complete focus of this. And it's basically, I'm just going to try to share some of my experiences in using the data and how to approach the data, because it can be daunting, the amount of information that's available out there. Usually there's two ways to look at the self-response data in particular. This is, I think, the most relevant information for helping us redirect our resources and figuring out how we should be doing outreach going forward. One way that I'm going to touch on just briefly, because it's a little more complicated, and I'd be happy to talk to people and walk them through the process, but is looking at it from a community focus. So let's say, either race or ethnicity, or a particular demographic focus, like home ownerships, ownership, income, immigrants, children, seniors, that kind of thing. The way to look at this is that, so you're not really focused on a particular geography within New York State, you're looking at a characteristic. And so I'm going to go into the example that I use, which is looking at Asian New York, right? So the way to approach this, and this is not something that I invented or anything created. I basically lifted off of Steve Romlewski's analysis that he's been doing on the website, that weekly reports and I think Joe Salvo probably uses a similar methodology to look at what's happening, because the challenge with the self-response data is that we don't have any characteristics associated with it. So the only way we can try to figure out what's happening within our communities is to identify, separate out the census tracts by characteristics that we know of from the American Community Survey data or from previous censuses. So basically what you do is you identify all of the census tracts, in this case, that are Asian majority, and put them in one bucket. And then you take all the other ones and put them in another bucket. And then you go through and you basically do, if anybody knows remembers statistics, you do a weighted average of the self-response rates. Then you get a picture overall of, let's say, if from New York State, how well is the Asian community kind of doing versus the rest of the state. And in our analysis, we can further slice it by looking at census tracts that have a high concentration of Indians, Chinese, Bangladeshis, and so on and so forth. And you get a fairly good picture of how the community is responding. And then you have to look at which benchmarks. So we're looking at New York City, looking at the US, and we noticed, a bunch of trends. This is something that an analysis that we published about a month ago. We're looking to do an update, hopefully by the end of this week. And you see there's several Asian communities that are lagging behind the city as a whole, and the Asians in general are slightly below the net NYC average, and these are just for Asians in NYC. So that's one way to look at the data. Come from a community perspective, and then organize the data and do the calculations. I'm going to give a more concrete example and do a walkthrough for the second option. And the second option is basically, everybody's seen the slides, right? Just want to make sure. I've been talking and,
Yes.
okay, thanks, Chuck. Okay. So the other way is to approach it geographically. And I kind of feel this methodology is more straightforward. There's less math involved. It's mostly looking at the different mapping tools that are out there and using them where they're the most effective, right? So, and then, but what you have to know ahead of time is something about where you want to focus. Are you looking at particular neighborhoods? Are you looking at cities? Are you looking at counties? Which geographic region do you want to look at? And these mapping tools, because they're maps, they're based on geographic locations. And so it's really, really awesome that these tools are out there. And I'm going to just walk through how you should approach each of the tools and whether there's what each of them brings to the table. So just to kind of go through the process, and I'll walk through it in the example, is if you look at, so first you identify what area you want to look at, right? So the example I'm going to use is I'm going to look at Buffalo and then drill down on Buffalo and look at specific neighborhoods that seem to be behind. And then you identify the areas that you want to look at more closely, then you can look at all of the data that's associated with those maps to try to figure out who's your audience. Taking a step back, first you have to define what is low self-response, right? So are you looking, which benchmarks are you using? Are you going to look at it versus the neighborhood versus city? Are you looking at it city versus the state or county? Or if you're looking at the city or the neighborhood versus the rest of the country? There are different ways of benchmarking and just figuring out which areas you want to look at. Then you try to figure out, okay, once you've identified which areas are low response, and then you have to identify who your audience is, right? What are the characteristics that define that particular area? Is it heavily immigrant? Is there a lot of people with low English proficiency? Are there a lot of young children that are at risk of being undercounted? Those kinds of things. And I'll show you how to use that with the maps to find that out. And then finally, I think this is the part where Hillary's going to jump in, is then once you've figured out who your audience is, you have to look for the resources and the allies that are in those areas. And mapping can help you do that as well. Look for libraries, churches, grocery stores that can be a means of reaching out to people. And then also reaching out to state and national coalitions that have done a lot of the work about message development for specific audiences. And so I think that I'll leave that to Hillary to talk about. But I do want to make sure that that's part of the process when you're thinking about using the map data, because that's all of this information is going to feed into how you end up processing the information. So the three major tools I'm going to look at, actually there's a fourth one that'll pop in, but that one's Google Maps, and I think everyone knows that, is Steve Romanesky's Census Hard to Count mapping tool that's out of the CUNY Grad Center. And then there's also this another website that's New York State specific, from Cornell University's program for applied demography, I believe. And this tool is interesting because it provides a nice dashboard for particular neighborhoods and a quick way to look at characteristics. And then finally, there's the Hester Street New York City specific map, but it's an example of how you can use mapping to look at what resources are allies and community groups are available and out there. And then all of these have their strengths and what they're best for using it. And so hopefully, as I walk through it, you'll see how you can approach these things. So I'm going to switch to my browser. Here we go. So starting off with Steve Romanesky's map. Usually when it comes in, he's at the state level. Maybe I just start over again. Actually, okay, so usually you get a national map. I had played around with it just to, so you get a national map. And what's great is over here on the left is the overall US response rate, and then you also have what was happening in the final self-response rate in 2010. And then, you know, as you zoom in, you look at New York and you see where New York is. You see the self-response rates. We still haven't reached the final self-response rate that was in 2010, but we're getting pretty close. There's also a rate of change. We can see how fast we're getting close to it, and it looks like we're leveling off after a couple of nice spikes back in around Census Day and in early May as well. And so that kind of gives you a gauge of how well the state is doing. So like I said, the example I want to use is I want to look at Buffalo. So as we zoom into the map, you can see that Erie County is kind of in the blue area. But once you zoom in, you'll notice that the outlying suburbs are blue, dark blue. Those are the areas that are doing really well. And you're noticing that Buffalo City and, you know, up where Niagara Falls is also not doing so well. They are all below 50%. So if we keep zooming in, we can see, okay, we can see which areas are really struggling to get counted. And so what you want to be able to do is, you know, locate which areas you think you want to be doing outreach in, right? So let's just say, let's look at these two census tracts here that are really, you know, well below everything else. So we can take a look at, so you want to click on that area, and then you want to switch over and here on the left from states to whichever level of geography, and we're looking at tracts here. So you can see that, you know, to begin with in 2010, you know, was at, you know, almost 41% self-response rate. So that's, you know, historically a hard to count area, right? So we know that we are gonna have trouble reaching out to people. But it looks like, you know, it's even lower than what it was in 2010. And it looks like if you look on the chart over here, we had a couple of bumps here where there was some increase in response rates, but it's really flat now. It really hasn't been changing probably for the past month or so. So that's going to be a challenge. And then we also see that there's a big gap. The green line is actually the number of people that are responding, I believe, by internet. And then the line on top is the brown line is the total response. So it's showing that it's a very heavily reliant on mail-back forms rather than the internet compared to other areas of the country. So one way to confirm that is to go over here on the right and look at the more map features. If you click on that, there is the second one is called 2020 Initial Contact. If you click on that, you'll see that these brown areas, once it completely fills in, are green, which means that they all got a form in the mail right off the bat. It was, the Bureau called it internet choice, meaning that they gave people the choice of filling out a form or online or filling out a paper form and mailing it back in right away. The other areas that are in purple, either dark purple or light purple, were internet. They only were offering internet at the beginning, and then on the fourth mailing, only then, if they hadn't responded, were they given a paper form. So this is already, to begin with, an area that has been identified by the Census Bureau to be less likely to fill out the census online. So we know we already have challenges there, and we noticed that, you know, in 2010 it was fairly already low to begin with, so expectations are not really high in terms of that. I think that Steve's site is great. There's a lot of embedded data. You kind of have to dig around to find it. Most of it is underneath this pull down menu. I'm not going to go into it in detail because I think the Cornell site is more presents everything in a dashboard fashion and is probably a better tool for once you've identified the area that you want to look at and how it benchmarks compared to other areas. We don't want to go over to that one. But I do want to point out that a lot of the information that's on the Cornell site is also available here. You've got undercounted children. You've got populations that may be undercounted, so that includes by race and ethnicity, by immigration status, by income, and that kind of thing. Internet access points to the areas that will be challenged in terms of responding to the form online, and then some census contacts. And that is actually helpful in terms of reaching out to national groups. And I think New York Counts is also mentioned in if you click on anywhere in New York State, those kinds of census contacts are available as well. So those are the general things. Feel free to play around with some of the other features. There's a way to look at where all library branches are. You can look for, superimpose congressional districts and other things like that. So that's basically how I approach Steve's website. It's a lot of great information and great benchmarking tools, and also great tracking of how everything is doing, over time. But kind of once I've decided which areas I want to take a closer look at, a lot of times I'll shift over to the Cornell website, the Cornell program on applied demographics. So you'll notice it's only New York State. Cornell, the Cornell program there is a member of the State Data Center system, which is another Census Bureau program that works with state statistical offices to help them. Basically, they're a user group, and they are people that they talk to the Bureau about what their data needs are, and they have a lot of interest in making sure that the information from the Census Bureau is accurate and is easily accessible. And so this is the tool that they created. So if you remember, there was that tract that was that we really wanted to take a close look at in Buffalo. You can zoom in here. And what we want to do is find that tract again. And so if you look at, zoom in and hold on. Let me reload this page, sorry. Something's not right here. Why is it not showing me the response rates? Oh, because I haven't clicked on it yet. Okay. It's not. Hold on. Let me reload this. Sorry. Go here and here. There we go. All right. So now you can see green is high response rates, purple is low response rates. And as we zoom into Erie County again, we see outer suburbs are largely green. The Buffalo City is, various shades of purple. I believe this was the census tract that we were looking at on the other page. So if we click on it, we'll see that this dashboard presentation actually provides us with a lot of great information. This actually gives us a benchmark. We have the county. It's right now, Erie County is at 66.5%, and that this particular census tract is way down at under 30%. Over here on the left, you got various demographic information, including total population, age of young children. These are all from the American Community Survey. So it's the most recent data that's available. It's not a complete count. It's all based on survey data and then using population estimates to estimate these totals. So you get an idea of how many households there are, families with children, the grandparents that are responsible for children, college education, internet, households with broadband internet is about half. Unemployment rate is really high in this area. Median household income is really low. Poverty rates are really high, and that kind of thing. So we're seeing occupancy of housing units is about 2/3, and it's about half of the people living there are renters. And then over here on the right, you see more detailed information about languages that are being spoken in the area. Latino or Hispanic origin. You see that most of the Hispanics there are Puerto Rican. You look at country of birth, you see how many people are immigrants. It's about 203 out of the total population, so about 1/10 of the population is considered immigrant. You see the detailed race. It's largely for the Asian population. It's largely Vietnamese and some Indians and Bangladeshis and very few Koreans. We have to take those numbers with a grain of salt because of small sample sizes, but it gives us a picture of what kinds of languages and what kinds of cultures we are going to be running into if we're doing outreach there on the ground. And the language one, there's 2 columns. One is a language, everybody that speaks a particular language at home. And then the second column, you see that it's 252 people speak Spanish at home. 68 of those people have limited English proficiency. So you're seeing what's potentially the challenge in doing outreach. If you're trying to reach the Vietnamese community, more than half of the individuals there that speak Vietnamese are limited English proficient. And so, and all the Koreans there are limited English proficient. But again, small sample sizes. So be wary of numbers that are below 50. It's informative, just to be cognizant that it's a small sample size. It may actually be much larger or even much smaller than the numbers as they present themselves. So that's this dashboard. This is really great if you've already identified the areas that you wanted to look at and zoom in and kind of understand what's going on in that particular community, all kind of on one page.
Howard, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So you started with Steve's page, the CUNY page, before you went to this page. Is there any reason you like you said we use that kind of to pick a tract? Because it looks like we could have gone here to pick which tract we wanted to look at too. But is there, what do you view? I mean, I use Steve's page all the time. So what do you view as the merit of starting there and then going to this page?
So Steve's page is national. So it actually, again, trying to set the benchmarks is what I use this Steve's page for, right? So I understand how does Buffalo fit in relative to Erie County, the state, and nationally, right? So I kind of understand what all of those benchmarks are. Eventually, I'll probably settle on a particular benchmark because I don't know if I can cover all of the neighborhoods in Buffalo, for example. So maybe we're looking at, what are maybe we're using Buffalo City as the benchmark. And here we aren't able to sort of say what Buffalo City is because it only gives us the county in the context of the county here on the bottom part. So,
and I guess this page too, we also had the benefit of that other line that said what the 2010 response rate was, right? Which we didn't necessarily have that here. So all different types of benchmarking, really.
Yeah. So it's really benchmarking and identifying finally which ones you want to look at, and then you can, on Steve's page, you can look at what Buffalo's, you click on cities and localities, and you can see immediately how Buffalo is doing overall, right? So Buffalo in 2010 was at 57.6%. Right now it's at 49.1%. And then you can see, the state was at a certain level and all that kind of stuff. So it's all about that. Yeah. So this one's really when you've identified which tracks and you just want a snapshot of what's going on. This Cornell website is what you want to look at, and it's only limited to New York State. So again, another challenge. I don't know about other states. I imagine some other states also, they all have state data centers. Some of them may be producing something similar for their states as well. So I'm going to jump to the Hester Street example. This one is a really good website in terms of looking at what kinds of, they mapped a lot of the community assets that are available. Unfortunately, it's only New York City, so I'm going to like use the example of, because I know Chuck is out there, and I'm sure Chuck has looked at this website, but I'm just going to zoom in on Flushing, right? So in Flushing, you can see over here they have a bunch of different community asset labels. You can look at educational assets. You can look at services and programs. You can look at neighborhood institutions. And then so, you know, let's say we are looking at a particular census tract here. This one is in the heart of Flushing. And it's got a 50% response rate. They also provide some demographics, languages, and other things, but they also give you a great number of potential allies and potential sites where you can be doing outreach, right? So they've given you libraries and schools and community groups, like Minquan's right there. And so it's a really good example of looking at using mapping to figure out, okay, who are potential partners and where are locations where we can actually interact with the community. For upstate New York, you know, I kind of, you know, absent having a Hester Street map, what I would suggest is just using one of those mapping softwares. Either Microsoft has a mapping tool, Google Maps. There's OpenStreetMap also has a lot of businesses and locations and institutions that are also embedded in here. And I believe when we were looking at this, if we zoom in, we're looking at essentially the area around the St. Stanislaus Roman Catholic Church and Broadway and Fillmore. So that's the census tract we're looking at. So we're looking for Broadway and Fillmore, right here. And do we see the church yet? So as you zoom in, where's the church? There it is. So that's the church. So we know that this is the census tract, that the general neighborhood we're working in. You see schools and different houses of worship. We see some businesses and potential, you keep zooming in, you'll see grocery stores and things like that. So it's another way. You'll see there's an YMCA over here. So there's potential partners that you can reach out to do census outreach, or you know of existing partners that you're already working with that are close by that you could probably work with, and so that's another source of information that I will draw on. And it's also actually helpful if you want to even drop the street map, and then you can actually see if there's a commercial corridor there that serves a particular population. The census tract just north of here is actually very South Asian Muslim. So you'll see that there's a halal place at Desi, and a couple of halal places. So you can actually drop in and see how dense is that area. Are we looking at a lot of businesses? Is this a central business district? Maybe we want to do a postering or that kind of thing. So it's a great way to sort of pop in and look at that kind of thing. And I think I'll just leave it there. I think there's a lot of other resources that are available that can help you once you've identified the area that you want to work in. I think Hillary will talk a little bit about once you've figured out where you want to operate, where are the areas that are most in need, who is there and what your audience is. Then the next step is trying to figure out how do you connect with that audience and what's the right messaging. So I'll leave it at that. I stopped sharing, right? Yep, okay.
Howard, thank you so much for that. I think speaking for myself, I often forget that just using Google can tell you a lot right there, using Google Maps.
Yeah, you kind of have to also look at the date of it. I think you can look at, they give you the date information.
Fair enough, yeah.
So if it's like 5 years ago, then you probably don't want to use that picture, but a lot of, they're pretty up to date usually.
Yeah. So with Howard's having grounded us in how to think of the data, as I previewed before, that's only step one, is thinking of the data and thinking of partners. And step two is what to do with it, because our whole objective is actually to increase the response rate. So with that, we're going to Hillary Medina Lovelace, or as her name says here, Hillary Medina. She
This is an old one.
and Hillary has just practical tips to guide thinking through what does coming up with a strategy look like once we've established the neighborhood and the type of neighborhood that we're looking at.
Thanks, Mita. And yeah, thank you, Howard, for walking through all of those tools. I know, I think a lot of us are familiar with the CUNY map, but the Cornell map and Hester Street just provide so much just to ground us. And actually, Howard, your presentation is like a perfect segue into now what, because we're going to reference a lot of the tools that you talked about. So once we kind of have an idea for what is going on the ground based in data, we have our benchmarks, we have our audience. Now we need to figure out what do we do now as we're entering kind of this last month of heavy get out the count work. So next slide. I essentially put together quickly a timeline just to ground us in where we're at going into this month. So we all know like March and April happened, people were getting their mailers, people were, you know, sending them back, people were filling out the census. And now we're in the summer, which is, we're heavily getting out the count. And here's where we're going. So there's one date that I forgot to actually put on here that's really important, is on July 22nd, the Census Bureau is actually sending out a 6th mailer. Originally, they were just going to do 5, but on July 22nd, that week, they're sending out a 6th mailer to all households that have yet to respond to the census. Unfortunately, they're not sending another paper form, which is a problem because we know like anyone who hadn't filled out the census at the end of April got a paper form, but that was quite a while ago at this point. So if, you know, if you're going to you're trying to get out the count, oh yeah, let me say happy birthday to you. If you're trying to get out the count and you're like, oh, just go ahead and, you know, fill it out on paper at home, that paper is probably long gone at this point. So unfortunately, there is no paper form with that 6th mailer, but there is going to be a postcard with instructions on how to complete the census, you know, the traditional information that comes on. So that is very exciting. And that also kind of creates, if I would personally recommend, if you're looking for a week to do action, to do one last big push, that's the week that I would recommend, or maybe the week before, because they're going to receive that information from the Census Bureau. And it's really gonna, hopefully, you know, if someone needs one last reminder, that's gonna be it. So, you know, we don't need to try to do something all on our own. If we have the Census Bureau already doing something, we can kind of team up there. So that last, kind of like the second to last week of July is when that mailer coming out. And then the end of July, early August, that is, we don't know the exact date. That's an internal Census Bureau date, but we can guess that based on past censuses, around August 7th, that is probably the last day that households can self-respond before they're put on this list for door knocking. Door knocking begins on August 11th, and then the official end of the census is October 31st. Next slide. So we're here, and we really need to start focusing this last month of July. Next slide. Thanks, Natalie. And I think one thing to kind of bring up is, you know, Howard mentioned that a lot of our groups are going to be counted, you know, through this non-response follow-up, but we know that we really, really, really would like households to self-respond on their own. And here are a few key reasons why, right? Information is just more accurate when people are self-responding. It's closer in time to census day. So it is slightly more reliable, though at this point it has been a while still, from April 1st. And then historically, areas with lower self-response tend to have higher undercounts for an assortment of very long reasons. And I would actually add 2 more reasons to this, just kind of thinking about our communities. One, if we're working in immigrant communities, you know, having government workers walking around in the neighborhood might be a really scary experience, might be unsettling, especially when we're speaking with immigrant, especially like undocumented immigrant groups. We always say don't open the door for any government worker. You know, and it's hard to message except for this kind. So we really want to make sure that we're pushing self-response as much as possible. Next slide. So all that to say is July really is kind of our last all hands on deck moment. Of course, non-response follow-up, we are still going to be working, we are still going to be doing things, and particularly kind of with COVID-19, I think we are still kind of stuck anyway in similar tactics that are available to us. But in July, essentially, Mita and I are working on a toolkit to combine what Howard has said on how do we figure out what communities we're working with, how do we target them, and then what do we do once we have that information. So there's a toolkit coming soon, but here's just some guiding questions that I would recommend that we think about. So one, like Howard showed, you know, go to Google and figure out what are the local touch points in those communities, and do they serve that historically undercounted community? So you have your idea of who is in this group, who is probably who we need to target during this last month, and then we need to figure out where are they going, where are they interacting with, where are they congregating? Are they congregating, you know, at that church in Buffalo? While they might not be there physically, they might have some sort of digital platform where people are still congregating together. I also saw Catholic Charities listed there as a nonprofit. That's definitely a nonprofit that, you know, I guarantee you is still running, is still doing the hard work. So we have we can kind of think through, okay, where are the local touch points? Are they going there physically? Are they transferred to the digital space? And then also what businesses are operating in this area? Are there restaurants? Are there grocery stores? Are there mechanic shops that are still operating? And then once we kind of figure out, you know, map it out, I'm definitely a pen and paper type person. So I might even just map it out on paper. Then you think what tactics are going to serve this community? Is it going to be social media? Is it going to be digital? Or if this was an internet choice area that tells us that people might not be online, might not have that accessibility online. So a poster canvas or sending flyers or doing lit drops in these areas and putting, you know, flyers in certain locations, that might actually be a better tactic. And then also thinking about tactics when we're doing lit drops, and if we're doing posters, are there specific languages that we need? Should we put up some Arabic signs? Should we put up some Spanish signs? What type of poster, what languages are going to be needed, and what languages are going to reach that community? And then also what trusted voices are going to reach this community, thinking through those areas. If you don't know, because you're not working specifically maybe in that neighborhood, reach out to those nonprofits that are, reach out to those churches and kind of ask them hey, who is a trusted voice in your community? Who do your community members go to for information? Who's respected here? And then try to get them on board to talk about the census. And then last, of course, reach out to your CCC. That's always really important. I know I work up here with Rochester and Syracuse a lot, and COVID-19 was hard. We know that. A lot of government workers had to take a step back from census and totally transition efforts to fighting coronavirus and make sure that their cities were safe. So, but now I know for a fact, at least in Rochester and Syracuse, things are kind of coming back around. CCCs are starting to re-engage, which is late, especially for census advocates who've been working on this and emailing. I know I've been guilty of this, emailing them basically on a weekly basis, hey, what's happening? Hey, what's going on? But they're coming back around, and I think it's really important that we give them that space to come back, and come back in July with a really strong plan to do that last push. And then also knowing that even if we kind of miss that deadline of August 7th, non-response follow-up is still going to happen. And government workers are going to be out in that community reaching out to people. And if we're telling them, hey, don't open the door for any government workers, but you can still fill out the census, then you know that is our tactics are still going to be extremely useful going into non-response follow-up. Next slide. And then also just to mention on the toolkit, it is getting produced. I also want to say there's going to be an appendix for just some field tactics that we've seen around that seem to be doing pretty well. Just these are the most common things we've seen that seem to have the biggest payoff. So if you're looking to text or phone bank, if you're looking for poster canvases and postcards, and then also just a little bit, you know, messaging, some messaging updates, what we've noticed has been working, what maybe hasn't been working too well, how to target your digital strategy. So thinking through if your community is online and if they interact in digital spaces, that's great. And how do we really focus in the digital space? So kind of taking all of the stuff that Howard talked about in the physical space, but moving it to the digital space, using data and figuring out, okay, if I'm going to do a boosted Facebook ad, you know, who should I target and where should I put my money? And then also just, you know, as well, there's going to be some easy lift ideas for direct service providers, because we know that, you know, they are the ones who have been operating. They are the ones who have been doing things. They're the ones who might still even be operating in the physical space. And I say easy because they are working extremely hard right now. And they might be completely at bandwidth. They might not be able to do much, but there are still some things that they can do and we can support them in that are very, very easy. That's going to be a huge help. And then last, you know, I know a lot of us have thought, like, I have done everything and I really don't know what to do next. We're going to have just a list, a bank of some fun ideas. Like I know Syracuse is looking to do like a food truck that goes around and, you know, has some census information. There's also groups that are doing like loterias or bingo nights virtually for some groups that are census themed. So there are a lot of creative and fun ideas that have been happening across the country. So we'll have a bank if you're really looking to just maybe do one last big fun event that is going to get people on board. Next slide. And yes, the time to push is now. Now is the time. I also just kind of want to end with some tools that are available. If you're looking to engage in social media, you really do not need to start from scratch. There is a ton of stuff out there. There's, you know, Census Counts, New York Counts 2020 have some great graphics. There's also a huge bank of graphics from our national partners. There are videos everywhere you look really about census that are targeting a specific audience. Also, if you just search hashtag 2020 census or hashtag census 2020 on Instagram or Facebook, you're going to see some beautiful, beautiful artwork. You're going to see some amazing graphics from across the country that might really, really resonate to your community. Next slide. And then definitely, of course, there are so many census resources. There are posters, there are toolkits, there are one-pagers, there are flyers, there are stickers, you name it, there's a bunch of stuff. Of course, you all know New York Counts 2020. Please, please, please go and look for anything you need. And then also Census Counts, our library is hundreds of resources long, and you can filter by product, by community, by language, etc., to find exactly what you need. Particularly after you've kind of done your analysis of what groups are in the area and what you need, then you are welcome, right, to email Mita or email myself or go to Census Counts or go to New York Counts and kind of search for like what messaging is going to hit this community, what posters might be in Arabic, etc. And then next slide, I think I have one last tool that I just want to share to everyone because these are some great tools. One is we have census protection hotlines from a bunch of national groups. So essentially, if you're working in the field and anyone has any questions about the census, you can always tell them about these hotlines on the left side that are in so many different languages: English, Spanish, Cantonese, Arabic, Vietnamese, etc. So when you're working in that community, and you might not have time to sit with them and help them through the census, you can at least offer up these phone numbers as an example, as kind of a resource for folks to call if they do have questions, and they can be connected with someone in language. And then on the right hand of the screen is another resource that's similar. Unfortunately, it's only in English and Spanish, but if you go to our website, like as soon as you go, there's a little circle at the bottom that says question, and you can basically submit any question that you might have. You know, like if, you know, you had a baby and they were born on March 30th, do they count? Will this information be shared with my landlord? Any question, you name it. This chat box has been running for months and months now, so it has even more questions answered than it had when it started. And you're going to get a response within seconds. And then you can also text, you know, if you're working in a community, right, that doesn't have a lot of internet reliability, then you can offer this number. They can just text 442020, and it's the same thing. They can text a question about the census and get a response back within seconds. And I think that's all I have. You all are the experts in your community, so you all know what works for you, but these are just some guiding questions and some tools to think through, like, now that I've done my analysis, what do I do next? As we're reaching this stage where now we're really, really focusing in on very specific communities during this last heavy month of get out the count work, and then also moving into non-response follow-up. So Mita, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Well, thank you for that. I do want to add one last thing about the month of July, which is that the Census Bureau has also announced that there is a surge week for New York the last week of July, July 27th. And according to Jeff Baylor, who's a name many of you might know, that they'll be giving more information out to partners on how they can help. So actually at the end of July, we're going to have 2 different things to talk to people around, and really build events around. So I think that will be enormously helpful. And the other thing I want to say, Hillary didn't mention it, we do have an IG Live campaign that we've started, and we have our first 2 videos up. We'll be sending around an email on that to get more people involved, but it's going to be fun and exciting. Any questions from this crew as to what has been presented by Howard or Hillary, or general questions? I have a question for the,
Ashley, that's a good question. I'm trying to remember. Let me check first. I'm sure Mita has your email, so I can connect with you. When it started, I know a lot of these hotlines were you would call and then you would have to leave a voicemail and then they would call you back. But okay, Miriam, but I think that was just at the beginning when they were hiring more people. So
I think they were all live by Census Day.
Perfect.
Yeah. I have a question for our attendees, which is whether or not the information presented today was useful, because I'm biased. I think it was great, and I'm going to try to do this again and publicize it better to get more people, because I think it could be helpful, but I'd love the thoughts of those who are the attendees.
Sure, this is Chuck. I'm with the Maine Quant Center. I think it's useful for sure in terms of targeting. I know that, for example, we're planning to send another round of mailers, a couple thousand mailers out to specific tracts that have low response rates, that have high concentrations of Asian populations. And so these maps are exactly what we use to pick the specific tracts, pull addresses, and then also they tell us what languages we should produce the postcards in, whether it's English, Chinese, Korean, or English, Spanish, Korean, or whatever. So yeah, having all these maps available is very useful for that kind of targeting.
Great, thanks Chuck, and thank you, Ashley.
I personally had a question about people who are not tech savvy enough to fill out the census by themselves. I've been talking to some people in the blind houses in my own spare time, and some of the residents literally said that it's not just that, those people can't afford internet, it's that they can't navigate through the internet. And even if you provide them with all the resources, whether it be postcards or mailers or digital advertisements, they still won't do it because they just don't know how to do it. They feel helpless. So I guess what I'm trying to pose is, given this coronavirus situation, when do you feel, or do you feel as though it will be safe by July to do in-house targeted outreach to directly help them with filling out the census? Whether it be like bringing our tablets to them to fill it out, or providing incentives for them to fill it out with us while we assist them.
Yeah, that's a great question, Juan. I'll take a first stab and then invite Howard or Hillary. I mean, look, we can't predict the pandemic. None of us can. I'm certainly not Dr. Fauci, and he can't predict either, but I think it really has to do with individual comfort level. I mean, most of our state is in phase 3 and New York City is in phase 2. So I think if individuals are comfortable with it and having PPE and having a device, then that's just, I think, just a decision individual organizations and individuals within the individual organizations have to make. I will say we do know that walking the lines with devices at food distribution sites has proven to be a very effective means of getting people to fill out the census. So I agree with you 100% that there is a subset of the community where it has to be in-person outreach, otherwise it's just not going to happen. Howard, Hillary?
I was just gonna ditto, +1 on exactly what you said. I know in Syracuse and Rochester, things are kind of calming down. So they've been able to go to these food distribution sites and have census kiosks with tablets, with PPE, with hand sanitizer, with Lysol wipes, etc., and keep things pretty safe. So at the end of the day, I think it just comes like with a comfort level. And then it also has to come with some really strict guidelines for your volunteers on what they can and can't do in the safety sense as far as minimizing the spread and minimizing any threat. I think New York City Census has a pretty good one-pager on just some best practices if you're doing in-person census technical assistance that we can forward around after this. But anyway, that's a really good resource if you're looking to do those in-person events, because I do think you're right. With some of our community members, it's just going to have to happen.
Yeah, I agree as well. And I think it's helpful to have that best practices to share out to people. We, here internally at the Federation have been contemplating when is the right time to go out and do this in-person assistance. And I think in conjunction with both the final push at the end of July, I think we're going to start thinking about internally if that's what we're going to do, and figure out which areas have already got partners that are already doing great work, and in which areas are actually going to need a lot more help and a lot more backing, and certainly trying to access PPE and sanitizers and stuff like that. And I think that's hopefully there's some we've been seeing some interest in helping fund that kind of thing from different parties. One of them is in New Jersey, so it's not quite relevant for this group, but hopefully there's going to be some groups that will step up in New York as well.
I have to go. So I'm happy to leave this open and have others continue. Or, we can continue this conversation another time.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. I think we all have each other's emails, so
Yeah.
we're happy to carry on the conversation online.
Yeah, let's send around an email and make sure we continue this discussion. No.
One last question.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to wondering, I can't find this information anywhere, but do you guys know when the Queen's Library will be open again?
They haven't announced it yet.
Oh, that's so unfortunate.
Yeah.
It would have been such an invaluable resource.
Yes.
One,
Once,
they're planning on opening up some of the libraries mid-June or July. Sorry, I can't remember right now, but they did send an email out. I think mid-June for some of the locations.
mid-June is behind us. You mean mid-July?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Um,
All right. All the days are meshing together, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Miriam means it actually happened in 2019. Just teasing. Okay. Thank you, Ashley, for your email, and we'll be in touch.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.